I'm very excited to introduce Gita Syahrani. She is the founder of BLESS Indonesia, a climate breakthrough award winner, which is a huge deal. Some of the people who are recipients of that award are genuine global change makers. One of the many things that Gita does is as one of the leaders of the Sustainable District Association, LTKL, which is been around protecting forests and peatlands, which has had a huge impact on millions of hectares and ultimately over 1 million families. They are an expert in sustainable development policy and partnerships. I'm sure will be very relevant for many of you here, a prominent advocate and convener for collective action, and an expert in climate change adaptation and mitigation for communities. Again, something that really, I'm sure, will resonate with many people here. So, welcome, Geeta. How are you?
I'm good.
And where are you at the moment?
I am just back in my room in Kuala Lumpur, currently traveling here for work.
Lovely. Well, thank you for taking the time to join us. Just by way of an introduction, what is it that you do? How do you describe the work that you do? And why is it important to you, for your priorities in Indonesia?
I work on resilience, basically, mostly on inner resilience, both on individual leaders, but also in collectives. And by means of resiliency is finding out ways to unlock potential that's already there, weaving connection that is already there, and letting it resurface, reblossom, and trying to connect the dots towards a better economic system. So the overarching goals are how do we end up in a world that is less reliant on extractive practices, extractive industries and large-scale conventional monoculture, and build a pathway that actually balances human nature and also the universe that is external but also within us.
And so, out of that principle, out of the work that you do, has arisen Bless Indonesia. What is Bless Indonesia?
Yeah, Bless is basically something that I started very recently based on a big reflection moment. So after I won the award in 2023, that was basically the year where I finished my tenure in LTKL. So it's a year of reflection of actually figuring out what is it that I do, why am I doing it, and what is the pathway forward. And throughout the years that I've been helping to build different collectives since maybe 2013, and before that, I work as a corporate lawyer for a while and do public policy as well. The common thread are the human, and how can I help as many and support as many individuals as possible to maintain their rhythm, I would say, in terms of becoming all of you in the room, right? Becoming change makers, leaders, system changer, whatever jargon and whatever label maybe external actors are putting upon us. How do we stay grounded and how do we find the right rhythm so that we can actually pursue this journey as a long life process in itself? And that's why Bless was created, to actually focus on the essence of system change itself, which is the human that is driving whatever change that's trying to emerge from processes.
Sounds like you're really focusing on the individual in the context of collective action and holding space for that. And you talk about, and I'm just going to put it in the chat, you talk about breathe, connect, amplify in relation to your work.
Mm,
What do you mean
yeah.
by that, and why is that important?
So before we started launching Blast officially, just this year actually, we had an 18th month process of study with I think around 40 individuals. All of them are leaders in different contexts, trying to identify what James was talking about. What is the system in which they are leading, and how is it contributing to economic transformation? So we try to identify four different. We ended up actually with four different systems: government or policy, and then private sector or market. Then there's two other systems that often are overlooked. Number one is public narrative. Usually it's being considered as like a supporting system towards system change in a way, but it is a system in itself. And then the fourth system, which is most likely all of us, the system that actually impart knowledge, support with technical capacity, supports with the work on the ground, civil society, NGOs, think tank. It's also a system in itself. And out of that exercise of working with actors from four different systems, we ask them three main questions, which might, be a fun exercise for all of you to also do. Number one is, how are you? And to our surprise, even the first question break down a lot of walls. So how are you is the first system. And number two is, what is your current rhythm in terms of changing the system that you want to change towards achieving the goals that you want to achieve? And number three is, if there's a way to make your rhythm have longevity, have resilience, what are the support that you need? And out of those three questions, we do interview, observation. We actually do around 20 to 30 different projects with all of these individuals. And we do also surveys. We found out that, number one, majority of the leaders are afraid of the word tired. There's always a pause before people acknowledge that they feel they're tired, they're anxious. People are lacking this safe space where they can actually share their doubt towards the goal that they're trying to achieve. And hence, that's the breathing part. How do we find a space where you can pause, where you can notice, where you can actually reflect, recognize your assumption, and recognize your stress patterns? So that's the breathing part. Because we think system thinking actually collapses when people operate from fear or urgency and not from deep within, from love in a way. That's also another conclusion that we found out from this study. The second part is connect. People want to be exposed to actors using different lens. So actors in those four systems normally don't have time to interact, or they interact in a surface level, kind of networking. As an adult, it's hard for you to make friends, genuine relationship. And as change makers, people put you in certain box. It's also hard to actually make connections. So the second part, the connect, is actually how do we make this a safe space that is there for you to build trust, for you to share understanding with different perspective, have a different type of relationship that you cannot share with others. Because we think relationships are the core infrastructure of system change. It is the relationship that makes whatever lever you want to move actually move. And then the third part is, leaders are also, the leaders that we did the study with are also anxious about not having enough voice in a way, or they're only speaking to their own group. So it becomes an echo chamber. So amplifying means building a support system where we can help, or we can work together to strengthen ideas, actions, narrative, from local to national, from national to global, and vice versa. Because we think small successes are not small at all when you put the right narrative and you amplify it well. And these rooted stories are the essence of what can spread into something that has a bigger ripple effect. one particular phrase that came out of that part, the amplify part, is instead of return of investment, we might call it ripple of impact. So those are
I agree.
basically the three things.
It's fascinating. And I think the way that you framed it with a very kind of human-centered approach, really looking at the importance of the individual in the collective action, in the context of the system and systems thinking, is often neglected. And I think it's really resonating, as you can see from the chat, with the people here, because we hold a lot and we expect a lot of ourselves because individually and collectively we are trying to change the world or at least contribute to systemic change. I think what's particularly powerful is how much importance you place on. You talked about the public narrative as one of those four key kind of pillars, and reframing that language from return of investment, which is of course very economic and serves its purpose as a word, but the ripple impact and really rooting both the language and the kind of the personal journey in that kind of organic, natural flow. You talk about rhythm, which I think is really powerful as well, because it really makes us reflect on the momentum that we carry through and the things that we need to sustain that momentum. So the next question I was going to ask you, which is a little bit more specific, I guess, to your cultural context, and so for anyone who's not Indonesian, perhaps may have never come across this. And forgive me if I mispronounce this, but gotong royong, what does it mean, and why is this important for everyday systems change?
My dad, so it's a personal story. My dad is a history buff. And one of the things that he's been telling me from the beginning of time, I don't know, since I was very little, was the essence of our nation is gotong royong. In Indonesia, we have these five principles as a nation. And our founding father at that time had a speech, and he said, if five principles are too complex, you can narrow it down to three. But if three is still too complex, you can narrow it down to one. And the one is gotong royong. And actually, gotong royong is collective action. And it's about mutual cooperation. It's not about charity, actually. It's not about, being selfless in a way, but it's a shared responsibility to carry the load together. And what is interesting is this rooted practice in our culture where gotong royong was, I would say, a principle that is an essence to the nation. But right now, if you Google the word gotong royong and you look at the image that pops up, normally it is narrowed down to very technical practice of cleaning up river together or cleaning up anything to do with cleaning. So it's almost my own obsession is repositioning this term um, as a bridge between the systems, but also as a practice that you can do daily, but also it can evolve as we evolve, as Indonesian also evolve. The principles of not only sharing the success, but the journey towards success, but also sharing the risk actually. It might fail, but the willingness to actually try something new that might not work out and doing it together is something that I think is profound. And the way that we, at this, I try to integrate it into my work is that we have all of this theory and framework about collective action that is written outside of Indonesia. People outside of Indonesia actually study gotong royong as part of collective action, but the word gotong royong itself is rarely studied and rarely researched and rarely being put under a collective action framework. So we want to put it in front and center and say that this is about our way of organizing collectives. This is our way of looking at shared purpose, looking at without waiting for instruction, looking at how we can actually contribute to achieve a shared goal and a shared purpose. It turns passive beneficiaries, this word beneficiaries, to become co-owners of the shared purpose, regardless of which system this individual or this community or this group belongs to.
I love that. So beneficiaries becoming co-owners, which really speaks to that the context of systems change. So for I guess it's kind of ingrained in your culture. So for those outside, how do you create the conditions for gotong royong?
In terms of principles, we've identified six actually. And this is something that I've studied, also compare and contrast with some of the collective action framework that's out there, collective impact framework that's out there. So number one is shared purpose. And it's a bit different with shared vision in a way, because vision can change, but purpose stays. So that's one. And the second one is agreed shared responsibilities. And in a way, the evolution that I think is interesting has always been, or the assumption has been, in gotong royong, you need to be selfless. You need to think of others before you think of yourself. You shouldn't actually communicate what's in it for me from the get-go. But I think in practice, in reality, you have to communicate. Why is it that you're there? What's in it for you needs to be there up front. And only then you can actually start thinking about sharing the responsibilities based on the thing that actually moves you to be part of that collective. So that's the second part. The third component is continuous communication, and continuous communication within the collective or within the gotong royong, to keep each other intact and to keep each other on the line, so to speak, but also to share this relations, right, beyond transactional. But also continuous communication externally, so it's clear to others what is it that you're trying to achieve, what is it that you're trying to work towards, and you can actually invite more people to join the journey that you're taking. So that's the third. The fourth component is measurement. And this is something that is, I have a hard time. I struggle with it because I like to think in abstract terms, but unfortunately, things needs to be measured and things needs to be agreed upon beforehand. At least, what is it that you mean by success? And what is it that you mean by failing? And what's the degree of tolerance? Can you fail together? Is it okay to actually embrace failure as part of the process? How are you measuring all of that? Needs to be agreed upon, so you don't end up putting yourself in this debate of like, oh, actually we achieved something. Oh, we haven't. And so you need to, condition everybody to have this habit of looking at wins. What is big wins? What is small wins? What is big failure, small failure? But also to celebrate everything while it's happening. So that's the fourth. The fifth component are, and this is why I find this word convening or convener, and I make it my profession. Because you don't, like, sometimes we automatically think collective action or gotong royong, or this whole system change is automatic. But in reality, you need an orchestrator, just like the engineer and the gardener example that James brought to the table. You need somebody that becomes the orchestrator, and that somebody needs to be neutral. In different framework, it's called a backbone team. In reality, it might be a secretariat to a coalition that you're working on, but it's an orchestrator of how the system or how the collective is actually moving. It's the fifth component. And after I did my reflection point, I realized there's the sixth component, which is the individuals, the individual champions or the individual leaders within the collective itself. You don't need to have one leader, and it's not based on title, but it's a collective of people that is there to actually push the milestones that you want to achieve. For example, our coalition right now, the Earth-Centered Economy Coalition, is 29 organizations. So we have 29 leaders, title-based, right? But after we take a closer look, is the leader in title the same with the leaders that are pushing change within their own organization so that the collective gains momentum? Not necessarily. So identifying these individual leaders from the collective point of view is very important so that you can nurture their spirit and nurture their rhythm. And this goes back to the whole principles why we created Bless to become support system for the sixth element.
It's fascinating and really important to hear how you're centering it on such a framework. It really feels like it's layered and speaks to many different stakeholders. So my next question, what is the value of this diversity of stakeholders? Because not only are you talking about individuals, but you're also talking about, systemic change. You're talking about regional policy, local policy, governmental policy, and I believe you've worked at many different levels. So how do you support positive conversations across different contexts, different priorities? Maybe people have very different world views. How do you bring that together when you're working with multiple partners?
Yeah, I think, and we experience lots of failure. I experienced lots of failure myself because before I thought when you're in a collective and you want to do collective action, you need to find a common traits or at least some similarities. But actually embracing these differences, I find very helpful. And in particular, in the coalition that we're supporting right now, CAM, the Earth-Centered Economy Coalition, it's different than the other coalition that I was supporting that are usually it's bounded by similarities of the organization that created the collective. So, for example, in LTKL, all of them are district government. So there's similarities of traits. Before, it was palm oil companies. So all of the same. Before that, it was environmental activists. So it's all the same. In CAM, there's at least five different types, right? There's business people, there's NGOs, there's academician, there's media people, there's also enablers of companies, venture builder, incubator accelerators. But we think this differences works when you actually hold space where you allow these differences of working style, of perspective, of lived experience to be there and make sure that the space itself is safe enough for you to discuss in a healthy way from those different perspectives. So I guess facilitating and facilitation is one key component of this kind of dialogue because we think we as a collective, and I'm sure everybody in this group, right, works not with only one actor to achieve your goal. You would work with government to maybe give legitimacy through policy. You would work with community that provides the wisdom. You would maybe work with the youth to give urgency. You maybe work specifically with women that actually give, practical know-how, practical yeah, women just get stuff done. And because you recognize that you don't work with one actor to achieve your goal, embracing these differences within your own collective becomes a very powerful tool. So you can divide and conquer. So looking at it that way, but also recognizing that this is what makes you special, what makes you unique as a collective, I think is something that we're also continuously learning right now. It's almost having this collective say to all of the members and all of the partners that different worldviews doesn't scare us. They actually make the system smarter because it has a holistic and very different perspective. And you are not fighting the individuals. You might disagree with the action or the opinion, but you can still maintain relationship at the individual level.
I think that's really pertinent and actually speaks to one of the questions in the chat, which said, shall leaders take into account generational behavior and expectation when making decisions, or is there a one size fits all approach? And actually what I'm reading or what I'm hearing is that actually the importance of value in difference brings in different types of knowledge, different kinds of experience, which as you alluded to earlier, breaks out of this echo chamber that we can frequently fall into when when creating climate initiatives and climate action, because it might be that we're working with a particular type of stakeholder or we're working with particular types of groups. So my next question was actually more around knowledge. And so another type of difference, I guess, is the knowledge systems. So when we're thinking about indigenous knowledge, and many people here are working with indigenous communities, how do local and formal knowledge systems interact in Indonesia's climate and policy spaces? What does that look like? How does indigenous knowledge contribute to wider climate and policy change?
There's an ideal answer to this, like what we aspire to have, which is different form of knowledge should be given the same level of recognition and appreciation. And at least from studying the knowledge system during our process in BLESS, there's at least four different, maybe even more, right? The thing that we found is that you have like scientific knowledge that's based on journals, that's based on different studies and things like that. And then you have practical knowledge that comes from experience that is being recorded. And then you have much more of a indigenous and local wisdom that is rooted within your own culture or within a place setting. And the fourth knowledge is basically based on your own observation that is not necessarily analyzed, is your intuition, your gut feeling, your instinct. And these type of knowledge are seemingly put under different lens. So if you compare, for example, this is the reality right now, right? If you compare something that is in a published journal versus something that we heard from an elder in one indigenous community, people don't associate that with a different level, at the same level of appreciation. For example, trees communicate with each other. You have scientific research that proves that. But the elders have been telling us that trees communicate with each other and with us as well. But people gravitate towards trusting the science part. Like not until you show a book that's written by a professor or something that is actually similar with the elders, you trust it. So that's the reality. But what we aspire to achieve is actually to reach the same level. So one example I would bring to the table is this way of defining technology. So part of the big narrative that we're trying to push is this responsible bioeconomy model in Indonesia and other tropical forest countries as well. And one important component of this type of economy is value addition through innovation and technology for biodiversity utilization in a responsible manner. And because there's a strong emphasis in innovation and technology, we actually try to pitch to the government, what if we define technology and innovation differently than we are defining it right now? And we give them examples from local and traditional knowledge, institutionalized effort in Australia and New Zealand, where you can actually get certified to learn about the Maori's ways of building a boat, for example. And we also show how MIT, as a leading research and innovation name, they actually embed technology that is inspired by local and indigenous knowledge as part of their definition. And one of our member, Pratisara Bumi Foundation, a foundation in Bali, is actually doing a whole research on that. And this is something that we want to embed in our policy recommendation also to the government. So in a way, this is how we're trying to kind of even the playing field, so to speak. Since, again, in system thinking, you have to define your boundaries, right? And for us, the boundaries right now, in terms of changing this whole paradigm of different types of knowledge, starts from this particular thing of defining a technology for now.
It's really inspiring and actually speaks to a lot of what Hindu Ibrahim said to us about the work that she's doing in Chad about bridging local and knowledge systems and how you almost have to fight for something that has been the longest time that instinctively we know in terms of, I guess, informal knowledge systems, so knowledge systems that exist outside of academia, and the battle that needs to be fought to remind people of the importance of anchoring all knowledge in the informal indigenous knowledge systems. I'm conscious of time, so I have two short questions for you left, Gita. I could ask you questions all day. I'm really enjoying this conversation. Um, my first question, my first question was just a personal one, which was you're holding a lot, right? We're here in a community of practice, and just on a personal level, I really recognize the energy that it takes, especially to think so systemically, to work with so many different organizations. Um, it's tiring. You take a lot of energy. It's not extractive in the classic sense that we're talking, but it takes a lot of energy out of you. My question is, what is it that gets you up in the morning and keep doing the amazing work that you are doing?
My cats, no. Well, yeah. Um, no, but we actually, I actually come to like a whole theory about love and why it becomes such a powerful anchor to what I do and how I do things in Bless and in other work. We always assume that all of us change makers, we always assume that our biggest motivation is like to drive change for the humanity and like all this big stuff, right? But at the end of it, when I ask back to myself, maybe it's about love of myself. Like I don't want I don't want to suffer. I don't want to live in a world where air are hard to breathe in. I don't have water running. Like I love myself too much to allow myself to be trapped in that position. And only then, like I know it's cliche. It might sound cliche, but actually it's very true. Self-love is the beginning of you unlocking your power to actually acknowledge that probably your next level of motivation, at least for me, is my closest circle. It might be one person, it might be two-person. For me, it's my husband and my parents and my three cats, and that's it. That's why I do things that I do because I don't want them to suffer.
The
And,
importance of
you know,
self-love.
yeah, like self-love and this like second layer of inner inner circle, right? Either your blood relatives, your chosen family, whatever it is that's closest to your heart. At least for me, that's the biggest motivation. And my action might ripple, the impact might ripple to bigger kind of causes of, I don't know, like the city, the region, the country, the world, I don't know. But what gets me up and show up every day is because I don't want to suffer. I don't want my loved ones to suffer. And that's it.
Such an important and beautiful way to end our conversation. So the final question I have for you, Gita, is do you have a provocation or question that you can leave us, this community of practice, with that will help us all
Mm.
reflect on the initiatives that we're building? And we have initiatives here from Nigeria, several from Indonesia to Pakistan, France, Germany. What can you leave us with that will help us reflect?
This is one question that I struggle with the most during my time of reflection in 2024. So it took me a year. But the question is, what if the system, whatever system that you're trying to change, is actually waiting for you to change first within your own initiative? What is your personal assumption, your personal fear, your personal habit that is actually reinforcing the very pattern that you are trying to transform? It can be as simple as, oh, the government wouldn't care, or the community wouldn't trust me, or women, they don't have time to actually lead because they are doing a lot of things already.
Thank you. And I think it really draws together. I think what you do so beautifully, Gita, is take something so big, potentially overwhelming and complex as systems and reduce it down in the best possible way to the importance of self-care, self-love, and the support that is needed to enable other individuals to build connective action. So thank you so much for joining us, Gita.